Let's do it.
Hello, good morning, everybody. You've got Jan and Dwayne here. We're doing our Sunday morning podcast. We're going to try to keep it short and sweet. I'm actually going to start a half an hour alarm right now. Okay. And
Yeah.
so we're just kind of going to go off the cuff. Both of us are very busy, so we're going to just try to fit this in here. Jan's got some really cool information. And we're going to introduce our first magazine. Okay. So Jan, maybe talk about what you just talked about with me off air just now about Lincoln and all of that. Just give maybe a couple minutes of context before we open the pages into our issue number 1, and we'll talk about Paris 1919. But first, I want everybody to understand a little context of the history that happened just prior to that. Okay.
Right. So this is the second issue of our, what do we call it? A Zine, right? And we're going to end this one over here with a blog that introduces the Tona of 1810. And the Tona of 1810 was an amendment introduced to the U.S. Constitution, and it was the 13th Amendment. And it was actually lawfully ratified by 2/3 votes. However, at that time, there was additional states being introduced into the Union. And there was a time where more states were added, despite the fact that the vote was already passed. And because of the War of 1812, the votes weren't counted properly. And this Article 13 actually did not end up being written into the Constitution. Now let's read what this Article 13 actually says, because this is important.
Yes, totally.
It says, if any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall, just to give that some perspective, a title of honor would be like if you're a lawyer of the Bar Association, and the Bar Association is British accreditation, and that therefore makes you loyal to the British Crown. So if you're a lawyer, you would never be able to serve on the U.S. government. Actually, what happened was all lawyers served on the U.S. government.
Right.
So that not being said, let's keep going. Or shall, without the consent of Congress, which this is where they were able to introduce this later on. They used this little line of the consent of Congress, because what they did was they conditionally, congressionally allowed certain people to be able to have, say, dual citizenship. How can you have dual citizenship and be serving on U.S. government? Well, what we'll discover now is many U.S. senators, congressmen, and such actually have dual citizenship. And which country, no less? You want to take a guess to which country they're dual citizens to? Anybody?
We don't
Wayne?
mention that word, do we, here?
No. Well, I got to go ahead, go on then. We'll leave that alone for now. Accept and retain any present pension, office, or emolument. Sorry, it's not a word we use every day.
Interesting.
Of any kind whatever. So that's kind of like anything. Like that, I think covers like anything empirically.
Right.
Emulated under the sun. Of any kind whatever, it says. It might as well said under the sun, right? From any emperor, king, prince, or foreign power, such as such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States. So not only will you cease to be a citizen of the United States, therefore you will no longer welcome in this country, and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them or either of them. So what you see is actually most people that serve in Congress today, and this was in actual books. This was in actual books written at the time. This is out of, for example, I actually just put them in. I mean, you have here books that are, the references are books that were written at the time, and it was already being published in like the Federalist. It was already being published as law. As law, it was being published. But it was only after the War of 1812 where they burned down the House of Congress and all that stuff, the Capitol, where they burned down the Capitol, because that's where the records were. And after that, they were able to say, well, look, we didn't actually ratify this. We now have more states. Let's take another vote. Well, at that time, states that came on, they already had the people pushing it that were already on their team. So they weren't going to ratify anything like that whatsoever. And
So
that's what allowed them to undermine our US Constitution and go ahead and start doing things that were not constitutional.
yeah, and so what you mentioned earlier was that the Gettysburg Address wasn't emancipating the black slave. It was actually making all of us slaves.
Correct.
So
And
this is another
there's
misconception.
sophistication. And well, it's when you if you actually, like, I spent some time reading it, you
Yep,
see the sophistry in the words there. You see how the words are wrought out, and you
right.
can tell. And you say, okay, if you whoever wrote this with something not right. It was not quite clear. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Why are they writing it like this? Why is it written like this? It's not crystal clear. It's not transparent. It's written in sophistication, and they love using sophistry, words, sophistication of words and titles to make things confusing and
Well,
difficult for the end user to understand.
ambiguity,
Yeah.
right? When they build ambiguity into the language, then that opens the opportunity for every word having two meanings, just like Chomsky says about political discourse, right? So this is where we must be careful about what is said. And so the important thing here to remember is that all of the work to do with Paris 1919, here's the zine here at the bottom of our House of Applied Knowledge. So that in our library at the very bottom, you can find the zine here for a limited trial. We can go in here and look and read along with Jan as he goes here. So where are you reading from now?
Well, I wasn't reading. I was just babbling out of the rat cage. But
Oh, okay.
if you go, if you go to, I mean, it's the information is in issue 2. But
Okay.
we were just trying to introduce that contextually.
Okay.
I would say
Yep.
go to issue 1.
Yep, we're there.
Yep.
Okay, we're looking at the cover. Can you see that,
Yeah.
Jan? Yeah. Okay. So there we go. This is Jan's work here. He's been working on it for quite a while, and this is kind of what we're looking at doing. Kind of with a forethought that the internet is going to not be here forever in the terms that we understand it. Maybe our communication gets, maybe we get completely silenced. Maybe the internet gets totally shut down. And now we're going to need ways to communicate. And so, as I look into the future, I think going backwards is a good way. Embracing old snail mail again and communicating in the old ways that we used to. So this is kind of where this creation came from, right? From that idea.
Yes. Speaking about snail mail, we are going to be introducing other products, because like I do the welcome signs, I'm going to make them shippable size. And then also this year, our bounty in our maple harvest, I ended up making some maple candy. And I discovered that the maple candy is a great way to share it with people.
Oh.
And that could be packaged and sent and shipped. And it's a fantastic product. It's like an orgasm in the mouth. It's the most fantastic thing you're going to taste in your mouth.
Really?
It just melts it just totally hits all your, like, it's a brain infusion.
Really?
And it just melts you like butter. And it's the greatest thing you're ever going to taste. And as a result, I think, if I can, I got some friends I'm going to ship it to and such, but if I can, I may have a few dozen pieces to sell, which I would probably be, it's not so much about selling them. They're not probably going to be expensive. It's more in terms of sharing the maple syrup goodness.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The lifestyle that you and me preach, right? Self-sustenance.
Yeah. And we must, all of our senses must be touched in that. And it's the same concept that I do at the farm. When people drive in, I want them to smell lavender and all kinds of amazing smells before they even get out of their car. And then, I think you want to make sure that the place that they arrive at is beautiful to look at, and you hear birds and, you get to a place where you're embracing nature. This is how we synthesize all of our senses. And so, this is part of the ongoing battle, is to make things beautiful, make things attractive, but they have to be the right things, right?
Reconnect with nature.
We're not selling a rap CD, right? We're offering the information that
Yeah,
gets
I'd be
you
up
out
for
of
it.
hell is what we are doing. So I have to confess here, I've never actually looked through this here. So we'll look through it together for the first time.
However, your confession should be added that this is actually your blog that you actually wrote
Right.
and you compiled. So
Yeah.
therefore, you
And
will no doubt will be familiar with the content of the blog as
yeah.
it's been introduced into the magazine.
Yeah. And this is how we're going to kind of do our work going forward. We're just going to take the pertinent stuff over the last quarter of the year and compact it into a nice physical, visually stimulating piece of artwork. And so here's kind of the introduction to how we're going to do that.
I wouldn't so much go artwork. I think that's pushing it.
Buddy,
I think
no,
more of a
no, it's all going to
magazine.
be artwork.
Well, oh, you know what? To protect our ASS, yes, you're right. It's artwork.
Sure. I mean, this is beautiful right here.
Absolutely artwork.
Right? The Vitruvian Man. This is what we want to do. We want to attract people to the correct knowledge by making it beautiful and attractive. So he's got the changing images of man article here. So this is actually an important study to understand. You can go online and find it now, but it's a lot harder than it was even when I wrote this article in 2018 or 2019, 2017, somewhere in there. It's been a few years now. Excuse me.
But look at the things that it addresses. You know, like you
Well,
said.
yeah. And so this is how. Sorry, buddy.
It speaks to people.
Yeah, this is what I want to connect is what you talked about in the first 5 minutes about the emancipation of the slaves. And so all of this work about the Paris 1919 Peace Conference is about how we were enslaved and the creation of the CFR and how think tanks have contributed to our slavery. And there's a linear, we can trace a line of evidence all the way back from the first internationals. We're talking 100 years even before the Paris Peace Conference that this international movement was going. And this goes through the young Hegelians and Karl Marx through the first internationals all the way to 1899 through 1907 when we start seeing FDR and Winston Churchill as young men entering the political scene, and we see how they then create their careers to enter as the leaders. 20 years later they're kind of paying their dues in Paris and just prior.
Did they actually create though, or were they put into place?
Yes,
because it looks like all these boys were groomed for these positions. Yeah. Is what it started to really look like.
None of these guys like Winston Churchill or FDR are evil. They're not the hatchers of this plan. They're the tools of the trade, right? So they've been identified by these rich social elite engineers as, well, first of all, they're all bloodlines, right? Roosevelt's, they were long ago opium smugglers and drug traders. I mean, that's where, all of the old American rich elite families gained their money when we're talking about the Vanderbilts and all of that.
Murder, theft.
Right. That's how America was established.
That's how the whole world was established.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And so in Paris, this is really where they set the groundwork and the blueprint for what we see today.
Modern world.
Yeah. And so this Stanford Research Institute article is profound in that everything changes after it. And so, some people might say, well, how does one report change so much? Well, you got to understand what the Stanford Research Institute is, SRI, right? It's a study of human behavior. And then, it's one of the first research institutes of us. And this Changing Images of Man study was written by a whole bunch of social scientists. And some of the names that are involved in here, there's two Huxleys, Aldous and Juliet are both referenced in here. B.F. Skinner, one of the leading behaviorists, right? Paid all of his research into human behavior that he gained through animals was paid for by Rockefeller.
We have Freud, no doubt.
Yeah, there's a whole slew of these research institutes that actually come after. Stanford Research Institute is really the what they designed it all after. And so the internet first goes through the Stanford Research Institute. When you look at the first nodes,
Oh, scroll down.
Yes. Okay, so here we go. Yeah, I mean, it says it all here, okay? And this is where we see the introduction of pharmaceuticals. You see a rise in pharmaceuticals. And here's some screenshots taken from the actual study. Now, I said earlier, it's hard to find. You can still find it, but not really in its original form. So if anybody can find one out there, like I'd love to buy the physical copy. So I know this is going to be tough on the brain just to sort of scroll through, but I want to get to the bottom here. See this study here? And the changing images.
Look at a dramatic rise right there. Boom,
yeah.
Boom.
And so the changing images of man happened before this, right? But when you get into the article and you start reading, all of this, like opioids and drug use and pharmaceuticals, even hypnopedia, every way that they could imagine to enslave us or control our minds, they investigated deeply through the Stanford Research Institute, came up with a whole bunch of ideas how to do it. And we're suffering under the weight of all of that now, some 30, 40 years later. Okay.
Their symbolism and their perversion of us is so deep, in fact, that the chemical symbol for opium goes back to having a high resemblance towards something what was known as the mark of Cain, where the descendants of Cain at one point were identified and they would be marked. So it was called the mark of Cain, and they would have an actual, like, as anybody else would have, like an armor shield of their family. Yeah.
Right.
And what's been noted is that the tremendous correlation between the opioid chemical chain and the mark of Cain. And this link will
That's very interesting.
This link will be connected and made throughout our work, but this is like the beginning and the end. It's interesting how that actually connects.
Yeah.
And they're very closely related. There's doesn't seem to be like it's by chance, because they don't often do things by chance.
Yeah. And we said something just before we went on air that's important, right? To move forward, we're going to actually have to go back collectively, back into the history books, right? George Santayana said, those that don't learn from the past are condemned to repeat it. We see patterns continuing, cycles happening throughout history, right? So for us to actually break the cycle, which is something that's important to you and I on an individual basis, is to break that cycle. We have to go back into history and understand how we got here, understand our own responsibilities and our own roles to that. So,
well, we supported it. Everybody always jumped on the bandwagon. Nobody ever questioned. They used the media to tell us A, and we all sang A. When they said B, we sang B. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 2 + 2 = 5.
And when 2 + 2 = 5, we didn't know any better because one lemming in front of us is jumping off the cliff. So are we.
Yeah, bunch of lemmings, right? So what happened to us? I mean, I skipped out almost all of grade 12, so I would look to that as the leading reason as to why I don't have a mask on. So over our next few episodes here, I want to get out the importance of the Paris Peace Conference, and then I want to actually start connecting it to the past like we are here today, because you have a basis in a knowledge further back than I do. I've chosen to go here and find sources for the present day institutions that affect us. But what you've uncovered is that this ideology actually goes way back, right? And it's just that ideology permeates through these institutions that we can identify today, and we can say, okay, here's the names, here's the people, and you know, start making some real determinations about the decisions made there, right? So in Paris, they were talking about the future. They wanted to make the world safe for democracy, and the Great War was supposed to be the war to end all wars. Well, that has obviously not happened. These are, 100 years later, are proven to be empty political platitudes, just empty sloganry, because we're in a war there right now. 100 years later, Ukraine is still at war. This is Central Europe, was the big question mark in Paris. Okay, so the origins of the CFR. What?
Ukraine war couldn't have happened at a better time for you and me, buddy.
I know this is why
Holy
I don't
shit,
really want to
man.
be on video, but when I'm watching what's going on, it's like if we could just learn now what's been going on for the last 100 years, we can actually stop it. Okay, and so I'm loving this. That obviously all of this information here is mine, but I don't look at it like this, like that. This information is actually critical to understanding your own place.
Hold on right there real quick. Stop. Go up a little bit. This is something that's important here because you're going to see this name mentioned a lot, and everyone's like, who is William Jefferson Blythe III?
Right.
Well, what folks don't know is generally all politicians exist under a pseudonym, under a different name.
Yep.
That's actually Bill Clinton. Imagine that. But you'd have never known that he was connected to the Blythe family with a dumb name like Clinton, would you?
It's pretty interesting,
just like
right?
Hillary Clinton connected to families too. She's connected to the Bushes. She's a Kelsey or something like that.
Yeah. It's
They're
all
all connected. They're all connected. They're all inbred too.
Yeah, and I think in 2014 it was or 2012 or something. It was a 14-year-old girl that came out with a study that she'd done in elementary school that proved that all presidents except for one were connected directly by bloodline. So this obliterates the idea that you can, if as long as you were born in America, you can too be president. It's a lie. So
because it's not a government of the people, and as you tell on the government, that's what we're asking for.
Yeah,
that's why we want everyone to recede and secede all their positions because they're all enemies of humanity.
Yeah.
We want to null and void all of their anti-human laws. We want to return law and order, and we want to return governance by citizen.
Right.
Beautiful. By citizens.
Beautiful. And so here we see, the Project for a New American Century. It's critical that we know who this is because we just went through the 20th century was the American century. And so this is where you see the same language being used. So we just scrolled past Cecil Rhodes and we're explaining how secret societies do truly control the world. And so he talked about the liberation of backwards races and the expansion of the white race around the world. So this is the same language that the Project for a New American Century uses in the year 2000. And it's the same language that they're using today. Okay, so now you look at some of the guys here that were the signatories. William Crystal, right? He founded, his father founded neoconservatism. But what's interesting there is that Walter Lippmann coined the term. Okay, so we've got Elliot Abrams, who's still in the news, right? He was in Trump's administration not too long ago, and we still hear his advice being thrown out there because he's one of these experts from the CFR. And this is one of the major problems with our society. And these guys are the ones that invented this reliance on the expert. Okay.
It's a looping logic.
It is.
But they don't even hide it though.
No.
They don't even hide it. It's pretty much on the surface, everybody to see. Problem we have is we have a society of people who refuse to read anything that they don't agree with. If they don't agree with it, they won't read it. They don't look to challenge what they know.
Yeah.
They're happy with what they know. And when they read, they want to feel emotionally stimulated.
Yeah. So we go through the foreign affairs magazines that we feel like were the catalyst to 9/11. And we see the introduction of terms that we'd never heard before: weapons of mass destruction, catastrophic terrorism, right? This is the way that they introduced the language. And we can see this same pattern happening today, how they introduce languages, sort of pre-programming, getting you familiar.
Goes out there and sells it, terrorism.
And fear is induced, right? That is, and so all of these guys actually come from European education. They're all Ivy League, Harvard, Yale, but after graduating, they go to Europe and they learn at Freiburg and Leipzig, and they learn Hegelian dialectic, and they learn Freud, and they learn Fichte and Nietzsche, right? So they come back to America with the ability to totally manipulate the American population, and they are put into positions in which they have the utmost control. And if you doubt anything I'm saying right now, I got citations and footnotes to back everything. And if there's anything not there, contact us. We'll point you in the right direction, because in my research myself, I try not to get into speculation too much. Okay. It's important to build a
evidence
base.
is in front of us. You turn on the news
Here it is.
and the evidence is in front of us, right?
Yeah. And here's what you read earlier, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So this is in the article.
Constitution, Bill of Rights.
Right. So this is another important part of our past that we need to understand. What exactly are our rights? You have rights in the United States. I have rights here in Canada. You actually have freedom to speak. I have a freedom of expression. So we need to understand our rights and freedoms in our own country, right? This is understanding history so that we aren't condemned to repeat it.
What's Jefferson say there?
The germ of destruction of our nature, of our nation, is in the power of the judiciary, an irresponsible body working like gravity by night and day, gaining a little today and a little tomorrow, and advancing its noiseless step like a thief over the field of jurisdiction, until all shall render powerless the checks of one branch over the other, and will become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated. So this is everything that we're talking about. Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, you know, when you go back to the division between them, this is really kind of where it starts. And he's talking about stepping away from Britain in 1822. And by 1921, Britain and the United States were already brought together back into an Anglo-American reunion. And the Paris Peace Conference was a huge part of that. And now today, people think that this connection that we have with the English-speaking races, this Commonwealth, is normal, but it's actually not. We were trying to break away from Britain and their oppression. And that's really what they meant by all men are created equal.
And that's why the Constitution no longer applies.
Right. Yeah. So this is very interesting, right? This is obviously an alternative to the history that we've learned. But, you know, one of the things I learned this week that's going into my next video is that Charles Homer Haskins from the Inquiry, he's on a board called the Committee of Seven, which is the Committee of 10, which is one of these moments in history where everything changed in our education. When the Committee of 10 report came down, it was like the Flexner report in the medical industry. It just overhauled everything. And so Charles Homer Haskins, he's a leading guy in the Inquiry. He's right close with Woodrow Wilson, but he's on this Committee of 7, and they're in total control of the curriculum of history in the entire nation and the acceptance or admissions for college for knowledge of history. So you can see how they set a framework for history. So we think that if we go to school, we're going to learn a true history. Well, there is a framework to that where they don't really want to let you outside the boundaries, because once you do, you're going to start to see beyond the Western veil, right? That we are America, and the Western government foreign policy is really the aggressors of the planet. This is the thing that they don't really want everybody to know, even though it's like the most obvious thing, you know, that this foreign policy, this Wilsonian foreign policy, okay, still the same thing. We sit there and we say that Woodrow Wilson is a racist, but we still continue his Wilsonian foreign policy. That is exactly the liberation of backwards races and the expansionism of American and British ideals. Okay, so when we look at Ukraine and everything that's going on in the news, this is all sort of with this in the background that we need to understand. And then it's easier to see that this is really just patterns. We shouldn't really get involved into the detail, just understand the purpose of all of this.
And once again, the British ideals are that of original, you know, go back to Babylon and the Canaanites, you know, that's where that begins. That's where those original families that first landed and, you know, Anglo-Saxons and Saxony and all that stuff, it all goes back to those original stories the 12, 13 tribes of Israel and such. And it just, everything is connected. And then, we're going to take the time to show people where and how it's all connected. We may bounce around quite a bit, because there isn't a direct line. They used many. If you think about a circle, they used every single line at making sure that circle never has a single line to show a line to say, hey, look what they done. So we're never going to have a single line for folks to say, look, this is, it's everything's going to be connected. They've done it so everything is connected, so that no single person, no single entity, no single corporation, no single government can be blamed, because they have their people in everything, in everyone, everywhere.
Yeah. And I would say all of these guys that we talked about earlier, they're tools of the trade. I think that they're actually the beasts of future burden, right? So they're going to actually lay a lot of this blame on Wilson's shoulders, and these shadowy figures of statecraft, these personal advisors without portfolio, these people that nobody knows about that are totally influential, they avoid. And they're all members of the Century Club and whatever, but they're not the ones responsible really for hatching the whole plan, but they institute it. So there we are. We're over half an hour. We're at 30 minutes and about 31 minutes. I just want to cut it off there.
Yeah, we did it.
Yeah.
We covered it.
Yeah, buddy. And so if we can, I'd like to do that, every week, at least a half an hour, and just sort of move people forward. So I would say that that's it. We'll move on.
So,
we'll talk.
We got to write a blog. We got to write material for next week.
Yeah. So every Sunday we're going to put this out, is what we're going to do. Okay.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to maybe go back to the number one and go back through two. I mean, we go through it pretty quick in a half an hour. I'm not going to have we're going to do 4 of these a year.
Yeah.
Now in time, because it says series 1, issue 1, we'd like to do series 2. So we can put out multiple. And in series 2, you know what I like to do? I'd like to cover one specific subject, one word, one name your term, not name your terms, one name your term, and really address it from A to Z, one subject, one matter, one rabbit hole, one thing that we could really do, really cover, hit it hard. Yeah. Hit it real hard. Not a bunch of subjects, one subject.
Yeah.
One direct keyword point.
Yeah.
Cover it, close it, know it.
So I would say that what that should be is the Paris Peace Conference, because everything branches off of there. And I'd like to substantiate what happened in Paris and then move on to how that has affected us in today's time. But this era, this epoch, this 1912 to 1919, the Woodrow Wilson administration probably should be, more so than the Paris Peace Conference, the central hub from which we bounce everything off, the 1912 to 1919, because, he changed domestic policy too, not just international. He during his time, everything was overhauled. And it's because of this progressive ideology. Like the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, and all of the same people that sort of steered all that.
Woodrow Wilson, man of the people.
Right. But he's probably
bankers. Woodrow Wilson, man of the bankers.
Yeah. And so they said that Bernard Baruch pulled him around Wall Street like a poodle on a string. So we know who's in control, and we're gonna continue to expose who's in control at Bulletproof Pub. Okay, everybody. So I appreciate everybody watching, and we'll see you next week.
Yep.